The strangest part about watching your best friend marry the woman you were supposed to marry is that nobody in the room thinks you lost. They think you did. There is a difference. I learned that difference at 31, standing in a hotel hallway 3 weeks before my wedding, holding a printed email in one hand and my phone in the other, while the two people I trusted most in the world quietly destroyed a version of my life I had spent years building. My name is Daniel Mercer, and for almost 8 years, I believed I knew exactly who my best friend was. His name was Ryan Callahan. We met freshman year of college, when he was the guy who helped me drag a broken couch up 4 flights of stairs after my roommate abandoned me. We became friends because he laughed at the situation instead of complaining about it. Over the next decade, he became more than a friend. He was my emergency contact. He was the person I called when I got promoted, when my father went into surgery, when I bought my first house, when I got engaged. He gave the toast at my engagement dinner. He stood beside me when I proposed to Emily, and 3 weeks before our wedding, I discovered he had been sleeping with her. My fiancée was Emily Carter. We had met at a charity 5K through mutual friends when I was 23 and she was 22. I remember almost everything about that first afternoon. She had a blue sweatshirt tied around her waist, a paper cup of terrible coffee in her hand, and a laugh that came out before she tried to hide it. We talked for nearly 2 hours after the race. Then we talked the next day, then the next. Within a year, I was certain she was the person I wanted to build my life with. We weren't some perfect movie couple. We argued about money. We argued about whether the kitchen should be renovated before the bathroom. We had one spectacular fight about whether buying a sectional sofa was an adult decision or a cry for help. But we grew together. At least I thought we did. When I got my first major promotion at the engineering consultancy where I worked, Emily was the first person I called. When she finished her master's degree, I took her to dinner at the little Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. When I proposed, Ryan was there because I had told him weeks beforehand. He helped me choose the ring. He even joked that if I ruined the proposal, he'd personally explain to Emily why she should give me another chance. I believed him. That was the problem. I believed both of them. In the months before the wedding, there were things I noticed, of course. Looking back, I can identify dozens of them. At the time, each one was individually meaningless. Ryan texting Emily late at night wasn't strange because Ryan texted everyone. Emily laughing when Ryan walked into a room wasn't strange because she liked him. Ryan knowing which wine Emily preferred wasn't strange because we'd all spent years together. When Emily canceled dinner with me because she was exhausted, then somehow had energy to meet Ryan and a few friends at a bar, I told myself not to be insecure. When I walked into our kitchen one night and they stopped talking, Ryan said they were discussing my bachelor party. I laughed. When Emily started guarding her phone, I assumed she was coordinating wedding surprises. When Ryan began making little jokes about my jealousy, everyone laughed, including me. "Dan thinks I'm stealing his girl," he'd say. "Relax, man. If I wanted Emily, you'd know." I remember the exact night he said it. We were at a restaurant with 6 friends. Emily squeezed my knee under the table and told everyone I was just stressed because of the wedding. People laughed. I laughed too. That memory would later become one of the most humiliating memories of my life, because I finally understood what was happening. They weren't hiding from me. They were hiding in plain sight, and they convinced everyone that if I noticed, the problem would be me. The manipulation had started long before I recognized it. Ryan had a talent for turning himself into the reasonable person in any situation. If someone complained that he had forgotten something, he was overwhelmed with work. If he arrived late, traffic was terrible. If he flirted too much, he was naturally friendly. If I questioned him, I was taking things too seriously. Over time, he started telling people that I'd become different since getting engaged. He said marriage had made me controlling. He told one of our mutual friends, Mark, that I was weirdly possessive of Emily. He told another friend, Lauren, that I'd been struggling with anxiety and that I sometimes imagined things that weren't there. I didn't know any of this until much later. At the time, I only knew that people had started responding differently whenever I mentioned Ryan. Once, I asked Emily why Ryan had keys to our apartment. She stared at me like I'd asked whether she trusted him to breathe. "Because he's helping with the wedding setup," she said. "And because you're going to be out of town that weekend." I nodded. "Okay." She sighed. "Daniel, you need to stop making everything about Ryan." I apologized. That's another thing I remember. I apologized. A few days later, Ryan called me and said, "Bro, if I've crossed a line, tell me. I don't want this weird tension between us." I told him there was no tension. He said, "Good, because Emily's been worried you're starting to resent me." That sentence stayed with me, not because it was suspicious at the time, but because it planted a tiny seed of doubt inside me. Was I actually becoming controlling? Was wedding stress changing me? Was I seeing something that wasn't there? I began monitoring myself instead of them. Every question became something I asked myself before asking anyone else. Was I being reasonable? Was I overreacting? Was I tired? Was I stressed? I started losing confidence in my own instincts. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday. Emily had told me she was staying late at the venue with her sister because there had been a problem with the seating arrangement. Ryan had told me he was working from home. I remember going to bed around 11. At 1017 a.m., I woke up because my phone buzzed. It was an email notification from our wedding coordinator. The subject line was updated vendor communication. I opened it because I thought there was some problem with the florist. Instead, I saw an attachment that had nothing to do with flowers. It was a forwarded email chain. My name appeared in the thread. So did Emily's. So did Ryan's. The first message was from Emily to Ryan. "He still thinks you're just helping with the wedding." I stared at the sentence for several seconds. My brain refused to understand it. Then I read the next line. "I can't believe we're actually doing this." Ryan had replied, "3 more weeks and we're done pretending." I sat up in bed. My hands went cold. I scrolled. There were dozens of messages. Some were logistical. Some were affectionate. Some were brutally intimate. They discussed where they had met, how often they'd been together, what lies they'd told me, which friends they could trust, and how they planned to handle the aftermath. One message from Ryan said, "Dan will eventually calm down. He always does when people tell him he's overthinking." Emily replied, "That's what I've been saying." I kept scrolling. Then I found the message that made me stop breathing. It was from Emily, sent 6 weeks earlier. "I love you. I know that sounds awful, but I do. I think I've loved you for longer than I've loved him." Ryan replied, "Then marry me instead." She answered, "After the wedding, we need to be careful." I read that exchange 3 times. Then I went into the bathroom and threw up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't smash anything. I sat on the cold tile floor with my back against the bathtub and stared at the wall. My first thought wasn't even anger. It was embarrassment. I thought about every dinner, every joke, every time Ryan hugged me, every time Emily kissed me goodnight, every time I told someone how lucky I was. Then I remembered the wedding invitations, $800 of stationery, deposits, family flights, hotel blocks, the venue, the rehearsal dinner, the suit I picked out with Ryan. My mother had spent months helping Emily plan decorations. Emily's mother had called my mother family. I wondered how long they had been laughing at me. I wondered how many people knew. That question became an obsession. I didn't sleep that night. At 5:42 a.m., I opened my laptop and began reading everything. There were emails, messages, calendar entries, receipts, conversations. I didn't hack anything. I didn't break into accounts. I simply went through information that had already been forwarded to me or was visible in shared wedding communications. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. This wasn't one mistake. It wasn't drunken weakness. It wasn't a secret kiss at a party. They had been having an affair for almost 11 months. They had met at hotels. They had taken weekend trips under excuses that I now understood. Ryan had used work conferences as cover. Emily had told me she was visiting her sister when she was actually with him. They had developed routines. They had inside jokes. They had discussed our future as though I were an obstacle they needed to move around. But the affair wasn't even the part that hurt the most. The part that destroyed something inside me was realizing how deliberately they had rewritten my personality for everyone else. I found a message from Ryan to Mark. "Dan's getting paranoid again. Don't feed it. He's under a ton of pressure." Another to Lauren. "Emily feels trapped because he doesn't trust her. I'm trying to keep the peace." There was even a group chat where Ryan joked that I was one suspicious text away from a meltdown. People laughed. Someone responded with a skull emoji. I closed the laptop. I sat there for an hour. Then I called Ryan. He answered on the fourth ring. "Hey man." His voice was completely normal. I said, "Where are you?" There was a pause. "At home." I said, "Are you alone?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yeah, why?" I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "Nothing. I'll see you later." He said, "Everything okay?" I told him yes. He said, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah." We hung up. I didn't call Emily. I didn't confront either of them. I spent the entire day thinking about what I wanted to do. Revenge was the first word that came to mind, but every version of revenge I imagined involved becoming someone I didn't recognize. I could send the screenshots to every person invited to the wedding. I could post everything online. I could send their families the hotel receipts. I could expose every lie. I could ruin Ryan's reputation. I could humiliate Emily. For several hours, that felt satisfying. Then I realized something. If I did that, I would still be living inside their story. Ryan had spent months making me the unstable, jealous man. If I exploded publicly, I would hand him the ending he wanted. Everyone would see a devastated man destroying his former best friend's life. He would get to say, "See, this is exactly what I warned you about." So I did something harder. I waited. On Friday morning, I met our wedding coordinator alone. I told her there was a personal issue and that the wedding needed to be canceled. She assumed someone was sick. I didn't correct her. She asked if Emily knew. I said, "She will." I canceled the venue. I canceled the caterer. I canceled the band. I paid whatever non-refundable deposits I had to pay. Every cancellation felt like cutting a thread tied to a life I thought was mine. Then I called my mother. I told her the wedding was off. She went silent. "Why?" she asked. I said, "Emily cheated on me." She started crying. She asked with whom. I hesitated. Then I said, "Ryan." There was a long silence. Finally, she said, "Oh, Daniel." Not anger, not disbelief, just sadness. I realized then that I didn't need to convince her. I didn't need anyone to understand immediately. I knew the truth. That had to be enough. That evening, Emily came home. She walked into the apartment carrying a grocery bag and smiled at me. "Hey." I looked at her and saw the woman I'd loved for 8 years and the stranger who had been hiding behind her face. She put the bag down. "What's wrong?" I asked. "How long?" She froze. "How long what?" I put my phone on the table. I didn't push it toward her. I didn't need to. Her eyes landed on the screen. Her face changed. I watched the blood leave her cheeks. "Daniel." I said, "Don't." She started crying. "I can explain." I said, "I know." She stared at me. "You know, everything I needed to know." She sat down. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely calm. She told me it had started as emotional. She told me she was confused. She told me Ryan understood her in a way I hadn't. She said our relationship had become routine. She said she didn't mean to hurt me. I listened. Then I asked one question. "Did you ever tell him I was controlling?" She looked down. "Sometimes." "Did he tell you I was unstable?" She didn't answer. That was enough. I asked, "Did you both talk about making me look like the problem?" Her silence answered that too. She finally whispered, "We didn't plan it like that." I almost smiled. "You didn't have to plan it. You just had to keep doing it." She cried harder. She said she loved me. Then she said she loved him too. I stood up. "Then you should be with him." She looked at me as though I had slapped her. "What? You heard me." "Daniel, please." "No, I'm done." She asked if I was leaving. I said, "No, you are." She stared at me. "The wedding is canceled. The engagement is over. Take whatever you need and go somewhere tonight." She asked what I was going to tell people. I said, "Nothing." She looked confused. "You're not going to tell them?" "No." "Why?" I looked at her and said, "Because eventually you'll have to live with the truth without me carrying it for you." She left that night. 2 days later, Ryan came to my apartment. He stood outside my door for almost a minute before knocking again. I opened it. He looked exhausted. "Dan." I said, "Don't call me that." He swallowed. "I never wanted it to happen this way." I laughed once. That's the sentence people use when they wanted the thing but didn't want the consequences. He said he loved Emily. I told him congratulations. He looked stunned. You're not angry? I'm furious. Then why aren't you doing anything? I said, because I don't want her anymore. He stared at me. I continued, and I don't want to spend another year proving to people that you betrayed me. You can have her. You can have the story. You can have everyone who believes you. I'm done. He asked if I hated him. I said, not anymore. That was a lie. But it was the direction I intended to move. Ryan left. Within weeks, our mutual friends divided into groups. Some called me. Some didn't. Some said they were sorry but didn't want to take sides. One friend told me, I think you should give Emily a chance to explain. I said, she did. Another told me Ryan had always been there for me. I answered, that's what makes it worse. Then the rumors began. I heard that Emily had told people we had been unhappy for months. Ryan said we'd been drifting apart. Someone said I had canceled the wedding because I was emotionally overwhelmed. Another person said I'd become jealous of Ryan and Emily long before there was anything between them. I heard all of it. I responded to none of it. I moved out of the apartment. I rented a small place across town. I changed my number. I stopped attending group events. I didn't block everyone. I simply stopped showing up. It was lonely. There were nights when I sat on the floor eating takeout because I hadn't bothered buying furniture. There were mornings when I woke up angry. There were afternoons when I wanted to send every screenshot I had to every person who doubted me. But I didn't. I kept the evidence in a folder. I didn't use it, not because I was noble, because I finally understood that the most important thing I could do was stop giving them access to my identity. 6 months after the canceled wedding, Emily and Ryan announced their engagement. I found out through a mutual friend who sent me a screenshot and then apologized. I stared at it for a long time. There they were, smiling beside a lake. Her ring was visible. Ryan's arm was around her. The caption said, sometimes the person you're meant to find has been beside you all along. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. They had turned betrayal into destiny. I deleted the message. I didn't attend their wedding. I didn't send congratulations. I didn't send anger. I disappeared. And for the first time since I was 23, my life became mine again. I started rebuilding quietly. I accepted a position at a larger engineering and project consultancy in Chicago. I worked longer hours. I took classes in commercial project management. I made friends who knew nothing about Ryan or Emily. I learned how strange it was to introduce yourself to someone without carrying a decade of shared history behind your name. I learned to eat alone without feeling abandoned. I learned that being alone and being unwanted were completely different things. 2 years passed, then 3. I barely thought about them anymore. At least, that's what I told myself. By then, I had become a senior project manager at a firm called Northbridge Infrastructure Partners. One of the biggest projects I'd worked on was a logistics modernization platform for mid-sized distribution companies. I had helped design the implementation framework, negotiated vendor relationships, and built the operational model that eventually became a productized consulting system called Northbridge Route IQ. It wasn't a secret invention. It wasn't something I personally owned. The company owned the system and the contracts, but my work had been foundational. I had built a network of regional freight operators, software vendors, warehouse managers, and logistics consultants. I was proud of it. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I opened an industry newsletter and saw a familiar name, Callahan Logistics. The article described the company as one of the fastest growing regional logistics consultancies in the Midwest. I stared at the screen. Ryan had started a company. That wasn't surprising. What was surprising was the description of its operating model. It was almost word for word the framework I'd helped build at Northbridge. The same regional carrier network, the same implementation structure, the same vendor integration strategy, the same scheduling model. I kept reading. Callahan Logistics had reportedly grown rapidly by helping mid-sized distributors adopt a logistics optimization platform. Their biggest early client was a manufacturing group that had originally been introduced to them through a Northbridge partner network. I leaned back in my chair. Then I saw the name of the platform they used, Route IQ. My Route IQ, not mine legally, not mine personally, but the system I'd helped create. I opened another article, then another. Callahan Logistics had built its business around partnerships that had originally been established through my work. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I searched Ryan's company records. Nothing illegal appeared. The company was legitimate. The contracts were legitimate. The partnerships were legitimate. There was no loophole waiting for me, no magical document that would let me take everything from him. But there was something else. A professional connection. A chain of events. A foundation. And when I traced it backward, I found something I had never expected to see. Ryan hadn't simply entered the same industry. He had built his company using relationships and business infrastructure that had begun with the work I had done years earlier. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I whispered the sentence that would eventually change both our lives. You built your future on the road I paved. And for the first time in years, I wondered whether walking away had actually been the end of the story. I didn't contact Ryan after I discovered the connection. That probably surprises people, but by that point in my life, I'd learned that discovering something isn't the same as needing to act on it. For several days, I did nothing except research my own professional history. I went through old project files, archived presentations, public industry reports, company announcements, and my own career notes. I wasn't looking for a way to hurt Ryan. I was trying to understand whether my suspicion was real, or whether I was once again letting my history with him distort something ordinary. The answer became clear slowly. There was no secret ownership, no hidden clause, no document saying Ryan owed me money. Northbridge owned RouteIQ. Northbridge owned its client relationships. Ryan had not stolen a company from me. That would have been too easy. What he had done was much more ordinary and, in some ways, more disturbing. He had watched me build something. He had learned from me. He had met people through me. He had listened to conversations about my work. He had absorbed the language, strategy, and structure of an industry I had spent years learning. Then, after our friendship ended, he had used that knowledge to build his own business. Knowledge isn't property simply because you taught it to someone. I couldn't claim his company. I couldn't claim his success. And I didn't want to. But I could finally see the irony. Ryan had spent years telling people I was insecure, controlling, and incapable of moving forward. Yet the life he built after replacing me depended heavily on foundations that had originated in my work. The revelation didn't make me angry. It made me strangely calm. I closed the files and went back to work. Another year passed. By then, I had moved to Denver for a senior position with Northbridge. I had a small house, a good group of friends, and a life that didn't revolve around what happened at 31. I dated occasionally. Some relationships lasted months. One lasted almost 2 years. None ended because of Ryan or Emily. That mattered to me. I no longer introduced myself through the story of betrayal. I was Daniel. I was a project manager. I liked terrible baseball teams and expensive coffee. I had a habit of buying books faster than I could read them. I called my mother every Sunday. I had friends who knew me because of who I was now, not because they remembered who I'd been. Then, almost 5 years after the wedding that never happened, I received an invitation. It was from a former mutual friend, Mark. The invitation wasn't for a wedding. It was for a business networking dinner in Chicago. Callahan Logistics was sponsoring it. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the guest list. Several people from the original Northbridge network were attending. A few executives from companies I had personally helped bring into the RouteIQ ecosystem were listed. I decided to go. Not because of Ryan, because professionally it was useful. I arrived late. The room was crowded. Then I saw them. Ryan was standing near the bar wearing a dark suit. Emily was beside him. She looked older, of course. So did I. There was something unsettling about seeing people from a previous life. It was like walking into a house you'd moved out of and discovering someone had repainted the walls. Emily noticed me first. Her face changed. Ryan followed her gaze. For several seconds, none of us moved. Then, Ryan smiled. Daniel. I walked over. Ryan. He held out his hand. I shook it. It was strangely ordinary. Emily said, "Hi." I nodded. "Hi, Emily." Ryan looked me up and down. "You look good." I said, "You too." He smiled. Things have worked out pretty well. There was an edge beneath the sentence. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe not. I said, "I'm glad." He seemed disappointed by the lack of reaction. Then someone called him away. Emily stayed. She asked how my life was going. I told her. She asked if I was married. I said no. She smiled sadly. I always wondered. About what? Whether you'd eventually settle down. I looked at her. I did settle down, just not into the life I planned at 28. She looked away. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Ryan still talks about you. I laughed softly. I doubt that. He does. What does he say? She hesitated. That you were always talented. I looked at her. That's funny. Why? Because he spent a lot of time telling people I wasn't. Her expression tightened. Daniel, I'm not trying to fight with you. I know. She looked around the room. I just want you to know that things weren't as simple as you think. I stared at her. They were exactly as simple as I think. She didn't answer. Later that night, I watched Ryan give a presentation about Callahan Logistics. He spoke confidently. He described their growth strategy, their vendor network, their operational framework, and their approach to integrating logistics software with regional distributors. I listened from the back of the room. Every few minutes, I recognized something. A phrase I'd used, a framework I'd created, a diagram I'd presented years ago. Not stolen, not copied directly. Transformed, adapted, commercialized, but familiar. When the presentation ended, everyone applauded. Ryan looked successful. More than successful. More than successful. He looked like a man who had won. Then I realized something. He didn't know I was one of the people who had helped build the ecosystem that made his company possible. Not directly. He knew I worked in infrastructure consulting. He didn't know how deep my involvement had become. He didn't know that several of the executives who had opened doors for Callahan had first met through projects I'd managed. He didn't know that one of his company's largest contracts came from a manufacturer I had originally brought into the Northbridge network. He didn't know that a vendor partnership he constantly bragged about had begun because I had spent 18 months negotiating its pilot program. I could have told him that night. I didn't. Instead, I went home. 3 months later, I received an email from Northbridge's legal department. They were conducting a routine compliance review involving several former clients and external partners. One company had appeared repeatedly in the documentation, Callahan Logistics. I was asked whether I had any personal relationship with the company's leadership. I replied honestly. I explained that Ryan had once been my best friend, but that we had not had a personal relationship for years. I disclosed the history. Nothing came of it immediately. Then another email arrived. Northbridge was reviewing a set of historical partner introductions because Callahan had begun claiming in marketing materials that certain relationships had been independently developed after the company's founding. Again, nothing illegal. Marketing language is slippery, but the records told a different story. Several of Callahan's early strategic partners had been introduced through people I had personally recruited into Northbridge programs. Ryan hadn't forged documents. He hadn't hacked systems. He hadn't stolen confidential files. He had simply leveraged his proximity to me for years, absorbed information, and later built a business in the same ecosystem. That was legal. It was also deeply ironic. I thought about leaving it alone. Then, I received a message from Emily. It was the first direct message she'd sent me in almost 5 years. Can we talk? I stared at it. I almost deleted it. Instead, I replied, about what? She answered, Ryan's business. My stomach tightened. What's wrong? There was a long pause. Then she wrote, I don't think I ever understood what you did. I didn't respond immediately. Finally, I asked, what do you mean? She wrote, I thought Ryan built everything himself. I said, he built his company himself. She replied, that's not what I meant. Then she sent me a screenshot. It was a Callahan Logistics internal presentation. I recognized it immediately. It was based on an old Northbridge framework I'd helped design. Again, that alone meant nothing legally, but there was a slide titled Original Network Development. Under it were names of people I had recruited years earlier. My name wasn't there. Ryan's name was. I stared at the screenshot. Emily wrote, why does this say he established these relationships? I didn't answer. She sent another message. Daniel, did he learn all of this from you? I finally wrote, some of it. She replied, how much? I looked at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote, enough that you probably shouldn't ask me what I think. She called immediately. I didn't answer. She called again. I let it ring. Then Ryan called. I answered that one. What did you tell Emily? He asked. His voice was different. Nothing. She's asking questions. That's between you and her. Daniel, you know how businesses work. Yes. Then you know this isn't what she thinks. I haven't said what I think. He was silent. Then he said, you always did this. I laughed. Did what? Look for ways to make me the villain? Ryan, you don't need my help. What does that mean? It means your company is yours. Exactly. Then relax. He hung up. The next morning, I received an invitation from the same networking organization for a private leadership dinner. I almost declined. Then I saw that Ryan was scheduled to speak. I accepted. The dinner was held at a private club overlooking the river. About 30 executives attended. Ryan gave a short speech about entrepreneurship, resilience, and building something from nothing. That phrase bothered me, not because I believed he had built nothing. He had built a legitimate company. But he was telling a story that erased the people who had helped shape the road he traveled. After dinner, one of the senior Northbridge executives, Harold Benton, approached me. Harold had been my mentor early in my career. He said, I heard you've been seeing the Callahan people. I said, only professionally. He nodded. There's something you should know. He handed me a folder. Inside were copies of old project documents. We found these during the review. I read through them. There were meeting notes from 6 years earlier. Ryan's name appeared in several places. He had attended informal strategy sessions with me and other Northbridge employees because I had brought him along to a few social events. Nothing confidential had been shared intentionally, but he had heard us talk. He had met our partners. He had asked questions. At the time, I'd considered it friendship. He had considered it education. Harold said, I'm not accusing him of anything. I nodded. I know. But there is a pattern. I looked at the documents. What kind of pattern? Your old contacts became his early clients. I said nothing. Harold continued, again, that's not automatically improper. People move between companies. Networks overlap. But if you're asking me whether his growth came entirely from nowhere, I'd say no. That sentence stayed with me, entirely from nowhere. It was the professional version of something I had already understood emotionally. Ryan hadn't simply stolen my girlfriend. He had spent years standing close enough to me to learn how I built things, how I negotiated, how I connected people, how I solved problems. Then he had walked away with Emily and eventually used those lessons to construct a life. I didn't hate him for being successful. I hated the lie that success had been created without anyone else. A week later, Emily came to my house. I hadn't invited her. She stood on my porch looking nervous. How did you find me? I asked. Your mother. I closed my eyes. Of course. She said, please. Just 5 minutes. I stepped aside. She came in. She looked around at my home. There were bookshelves, framed project photos, a bicycle leaning against the wall. Nothing luxurious, nothing dramatic. Just a life. She said, you're happy. I answered, yes. She looked down. I don't know why that surprised me. We sat in the living room. She told me that her marriage had become difficult. She said Ryan worked constantly. She said he had become obsessed with proving himself. She said he was suspicious of anyone who knew his past. She said they argued about money. Then she said something that made me understand why she had come. He tells me you were always threatened by him. I stared at her. Were you? I thought I was. And now? She looked at me. Now I think he was threatened by you. I didn't answer. She began crying. Daniel, I spent years believing you were the reason everything became complicated. You chose him. I know. You chose him while we were engaged. I know. You lied to me. I know. You helped him convince people I was the problem. Her tears fell. I know. I sat quietly. Then she asked, why didn't you expose us? I said, because I didn't want to spend my life being the man you two betrayed. She whispered, I was cruel. Yes. Can you ever forgive me? I thought about it. I've already forgive me. She looked surprised. Really? Forgiveness isn't permission. It just means I don't carry you around anymore. She cried again. Then she said, I think I married the wrong man. I shook my head. No, you married the man you chose. She looked at me. There's a difference. There is. She left an hour later. I never heard from her again for several months. Then the business world shifted. One of Callahan Logistics' biggest clients announced it was moving part of its logistics strategy back in-house. Another major partner delayed a renewal. Then an industry publication published an investigation into the company's growth model. The article wasn't about me. My name wasn't mentioned. It simply examined how several rapidly growing logistics firms had built networks by leveraging relationships inherited from established consulting ecosystems. Callahan was one of several companies discussed. Nothing illegal was alleged, but investors and clients began asking questions. Ryan called me again. You did this. I said, no. You talked to them. I answered questions when people asked me. You knew what would happen. I knew the truth would eventually exist without me. He became quiet. Then he said, you think you won. I said, you think you won. I said, no. Then what do you think? I looked out my window. I think you spent 5 years trying to prove you could build a life without me. He said nothing. I continued, you did. Congratulations. Then why are you doing this? I'm not. He hung up. A month later, Callahan's board hired outside consultants to review its early contracts and business development history. The review found no evidence that Ryan had stolen proprietary information, but it did reveal that the company's marketing had overstated how independently several relationships had been developed. Clients were unhappy. A few contracts were renegotiated. Ryan's reputation took a hit. Emily moved out of their house. I learned that from Mark. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call her. I didn't call Ryan. I had already made my decision years earlier. My revenge was never going to be destroying them. It was going to be refusing to protect the lie that had protected them. The final turn came unexpectedly. Northbridge invited me to speak at an industry conference about professional network development and ethical growth. I accepted. The conference was attended by hundreds of people. Ryan was there. Emily was there too. I didn't know she would come. I walked onto the stage. I talked about systems, partnerships, mentorship, how successful companies are rarely built by one person alone. Then I said something I'd never said publicly before. There was a time in my life when someone I trusted took pieces of my professional world and used them to build a life I wasn't part of. I spent years thinking that meant I had lost something. Eventually, I realized the opposite. If someone can take your contacts, your ideas, your lessons, and your old relationships, but they still can't take your ability to build again, then they didn't defeat you. They only proved that what you built was valuable. The room was silent. I didn't mention Ryan's name. I didn't mention Emily's name. I didn't name two. Ryan knew. Emily knew. And for the first time, everyone else could hear the truth without me turning it into revenge. After the speech, I stepped outside. Emily followed me. She was crying. You never said my name. I looked at her. I wasn't there to punish you. She nodded. I know. Ryan came outside too. He looked older than he had that night years earlier. He stopped several feet away. You really don't want anything from us, do you? He asked. I said, no. Not money. No. Not an apology. I thought for a moment. An apology would be nice, but I don't need one. He looked at me. Then what do you want? I smiled. Nothing. That was the truth, and somehow that answer hurt him more than anything I could have said. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, with me walking away from Ryan and Emily while they stood behind me, realizing that I had finally become someone they couldn't define. But real life doesn't give you endings that clean. There were still consequences. There were still conversations. There were still people who had to confront the fact that they had believed a story about me for years, and some of those people never apologized. That surprised me more than anything. I had spent so much time imagining the moment when everyone would finally know the truth that I had forgotten something important. People don't always change their beliefs when presented with evidence. Sometimes they simply change the subject. Mark apologized. Lauren did too. She came to my house one afternoon and sat across from me with tears in her eyes. She said, I believed him. I said, I know. I should have believed you. You didn't have enough information. Neither did you. That made me smile. I had more than you did. She laughed through her tears. "You always were annoyingly reasonable." I said, "I wasn't reasonable when it happened." "You were hurt. Very." She asked whether I regretted not exposing them. I said no. She asked why. I told her that revenge had changed meaning for me. When I was 31, I thought revenge meant making someone hurt as badly as I had. At 36, I understood that revenge could mean refusing to let another person's betrayal determine the shape of your future. I had let Ryan and Emily occupy too much space in my mind. They had been the center of my anger, my embarrassment, my questions, and my imagined arguments. But eventually, they became something else. A chapter. A painful one. An important one, but still a chapter. Ryan's company survived. It became smaller and more conservative after the review. Several clients left, but others stayed. He sold part of the business to a larger consulting group. He remained wealthy, though not nearly as successful as he had once imagined. Emily filed for divorce. I found out from a newspaper announcement because by then I had stopped talking to people connected to them. She moved to Seattle. She eventually started working in nonprofit administration. I heard she was doing well. I was glad. I didn't want her destroyed. That would have meant I was still invested in her destruction. I wasn't. One evening, almost 6 years after my canceled wedding, I received a handwritten letter from her. She didn't ask me to take her back. She didn't ask me to meet her. She simply apologized. She wrote about the lies. She admitted that she had repeated things Ryan said about me because they made it easier for her to justify what she was doing. She admitted that she had called me controlling when I was simply asking reasonable questions. She admitted that she had allowed the affair to become a relationship before ending ours because she wanted the security of having both options. She wrote that she had spent years telling herself our relationship had been doomed anyway. Eventually, she realized that was just a story she needed in order to live with what she'd done. I read the letter twice. Then I put it in a drawer. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, because some things don't require a conversation. The real ending came a few months later. I was attending a conference in Boston when I ran into Ryan unexpectedly. He was alone. We stood near the hotel elevators. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You know what the worst part is? I waited. I thought you would never recover." I looked at him. He laughed bitterly. "I thought you'd spend your life angry." "I almost did." "Why didn't you?" "Because I got tired." He nodded. "I used to think you were weak for walking away." "I know. I thought I won." "I know. You didn't fight me." "No. You didn't expose us." "No. You didn't expose us." "No. You just disappeared." "Yes." He looked at the elevator doors. That was the part I couldn't understand. I asked, "Why?" He said, "Because if you hated me, I could understand it. If you tried to destroy me, I could fight you. But you didn't care." I corrected him. "I cared. I just stopped caring more about your life than mine." He looked at me. That sentence seemed to land. He said, "Emily told me what you said to her." I said nothing. "She said you forgave her." I did. "How?" I shrugged. I decided I didn't want to spend the rest of my life punishing someone who already lost me. He smiled sadly. "You really did become different." I said no. I became myself again. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. He didn't follow. The doors closed between us. That was the last time I saw him. People sometimes ask me why I let him marry her. The answer is that I didn't let him do anything. She was never mine to give away. She was a person who made her own choices. Ryan was a person who made his. I simply refused to fight for something that had already shown me it didn't deserve to be fought for. The wedding cancellation had been the first revenge, not because it embarrassed them, because it removed me from their triangle. My silence had been the second, not because it protected them, because it protected me. My rebuilding had been the third, not because I wanted them to see me succeed, because I needed to prove to myself that I could. And the truth about Ryan's company had been the final piece. I didn't destroy his business. I didn't steal his clients. I didn't fabricate accusations. I didn't leak private messages. I didn't call his wife and fill her head with revenge. I simply stopped protecting a false narrative when legitimate questions arose. When people asked how certain relationships had developed, I answered truthfully. When executives asked whether Ryan had known about the Northbridge network years before founding his company, I told them exactly what I remembered. When investigators reviewed documents, I gave them what I had. Nothing more, nothing less. The consequences belonged to the facts. That distinction mattered to me. I didn't want to become Ryan. I didn't want to manipulate people into seeing him as a villain. I wanted reality to stand on its own. And it did. Years later, I married someone else. Her name was Rachel. We met at a bookstore when I accidentally knocked a stack of architecture books onto her foot. She laughed instead of getting angry. I apologized approximately 17 times. She said, "You're either extremely polite or you've committed some serious crimes." I laughed. We talked for an hour. She knew nothing about my past. I didn't tell her on the first date or the second. When I eventually told her, she listened without trying to rescue me. She asked one question, "Do you still love her?" I thought about Emily. The answer was no. Then Rachel asked, "Do you still hate him?" Again, no. She smiled. "Then I think you're free." We married 2 years later in a small ceremony by the coast. There was no giant venue, no elaborate seating chart, no giant group of friends trying to prove anything, just people we actually loved. My mother cried during the vows. Rachel's father gave a speech that made everyone laugh. I looked around the room and realized something strange. I wasn't thinking about the wedding that never happened. I wasn't imagining Emily sitting somewhere in the audience. I wasn't wondering whether Ryan had heard about my success. I wasn't measuring my happiness against theirs. I was simply happy. That was the moment I knew I had won. Not when Ryan's company struggled. Not when Emily apologized. Not when old friends admitted they had been wrong. Not when I stood on the stage and told the truth. It happened when I realized I hadn't thought about them for an entire day. Then a week. Then a month. That is the kind of revenge nobody tells you about. You don't need their regret. You don't need their downfall. You don't need them crawling back. You don't even need them to understand what they did. You need to reach the point where their understanding no longer changes anything about your life. Sometimes I still think about that night in the bathroom, years ago, when I sat on the tile floor holding a phone full of messages and wondered how I could possibly rebuild. I wish I could go back and tell that version of myself something. I would tell him that the life he thought he had lost wasn't his life. It was a plan. There is a difference. Plans can die. You don't have to. I would tell him that the woman he loved wasn't the person he thought she was. That his best friend wasn't his best friend. That the people who believed the wrong story weren't necessarily worth convincing. And I would tell him something I couldn't understand at 31. Sometimes walking away is not surrender. Sometimes it is the first move you make after you finally realize the game was never worth winning. Ryan wanted to replace me. He succeeded. Emily chose him. They built a life together. They had the house, the business, the vacations, the photographs, the social status, the story about how their love had supposedly been inevitable. For years, they believed I was the loser in that story. And maybe from the outside, it looked that way. I lost the wedding. I lost my fiancée. I lost my best friend. I lost people I thought would be in my life forever. But I gained something I wouldn't trade for any of it. I gained myself back. Ryan once told people I was controlling because I wanted to know where Emily was. He told them I was jealous because I noticed how close they had become. He told them I was unstable because I questioned things that didn't make sense. The truth was simpler. I was a man whose instincts were correct, surrounded by people who benefited from convincing him they weren't. Once I understood that, I stopped asking permission to trust myself. That's the lesson I carried forward. Trust your instincts, but verify your facts. Don't confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. Don't mistake silence for weakness. And most importantly, don't spend your life trying to win a courtroom case against people who have already left the room. There will always be people who believe the first version of the story they hear. Let them. Your job isn't to control every person's opinion of you. Your job is to build a life that doesn't depend on it. The most satisfying thing about my revenge is that I didn't have to become cruel. I didn't have to become rich enough to intimidate them. I didn't have to expose every secret. I didn't have to destroy their marriage. I didn't have to make Emily regret choosing Ryan. I didn't even have to make Ryan regret betraying me. Their consequences came from their own decisions. My only responsibility was deciding what I would do with mine. And I chose to walk away. Years later, when I think about that wedding invitation they eventually sent me, the one announcing that Ryan and Emily were getting married, I remember staring at it for maybe 30 seconds before throwing it away. At the time, I thought I was throwing away an invitation. Looking back, I think I was throwing away an entire identity. I stopped being Daniel, the guy who had been betrayed. I stopped being Daniel, Ryan's former best friend. I stopped being Emily's ex-fiancé. I became just Daniel, a man with his own career, his own friends, his own wife, his own mistakes, his own future. And that's why I don't tell this story as a story about how I destroyed my enemies. I didn't. I let them keep each other. I let them tell whatever story they needed to tell. I let them believe they had won. Then I built a life they weren't invited into. That was the part they couldn't take from me. And if there is one thing I learned from the entire disaster, it's this. The person who betrays you may get the girl, the house, the company, the applause, and even the story. But they don't get to decide what your life becomes afterward. You do. So yes, my best friend ruined my wedding. Yes, he married the woman I was supposed to marry. Yes, for a while, everyone thought he won. But I eventually understood something that took me years to see. I never needed to stop him from marrying her. I never needed to ruin their life. I never needed to prove that I was better than him. I only needed to become someone who no longer wanted what he had. And when that happened, the revenge was already complete.